So engagement to me means presence, full presence, participation, and thoughtful thinking and expression.
Great. And Alaísa?
Engagement, like Andrea, I do believe in full presence. I think that to engage people, we must leave our own assumptions that we might have about them behind and just be completely open-minded and with an open heart as well.
Great. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Stephen Burby. He's an English teacher at the Freshman Center in Brentwod School District in Nassau County, New York. He's been a participating teacher with me and Sarah here at the American Immigration Council with the Teach Immigration Project. He's been teaching for over 20 years, is committed to experiential learning and leadership development. Dr. Burby, how do you define engagement?
Well, from the standpoint of an educator, I would define engagement as students being involved and connected to the subject matter and to the process of learning. And it'd be really hard for me to argue with what either of the presenters has previously said about being open and about getting your heart engaged. I think that's incredibly important. And the AIC has been instrumental in doing that with some of my students this year.
Great. And Andrea Garcia-Fernandez, welcome. Thank you so much. We actually met on the phone years ago, and she told me so many stories, and I really appreciate her advocacy. She's an associate director of corporate engagement at Europe here in Washington, D.C. She's also a youth advocate and is committed to closing the educational divide and making sure that young people are introduced to STEM and are given opportunities to succeed in school and beyond, regardless of their immigration status. Andrea Garcia-Fernandez came to the United States from Ecuador as a 7-year-old, and she's had both positive and negative experiences in the public school system and has a very different perspective. Andrea, how do you define engagement?
Well, thank you for having me. I define meeting people where they're at. And, as an immigrant, you come with different experiences that might not necessarily be in a textbook, but definitely add value and context to any educational environment. And I think if you're truly engaged, you're not only meeting them where they're at, but you're also looking for those stories to enrich the context of the conversation.
That's great. Thank you. So, Steve, what are some ways that you've integrated immigration in your class curriculum?
Okay, I have this year in particular, I'm just going to focus on this past year and my experience with the American Immigration Council, because it's been really an incredibly transformative experience. I know for my students and the instruction in terms of what I've been able to do has been pretty amazing because of that. I don't know.
And what are some of the benefits that you've seen from engaging students in a, just learning about immigration and current events?
Okay. Well, having the American Immigration Council resources and the involvement of the staff, Claire, you, and Sarah Burnett, have been really incredible. So the way I was able to get kids involved through this program had a lot to do with the resources. We had the field trip to Nassau BOCES in October, and I brought some of my students, and they were exposed to a lot of information about the immigration law issues that students in our neighborhood would face. Brentwood has a very high immigrant population, and so these issues do touch home with a lot of them. And so they found the content very engaging. So they were able to learn a lot of stuff about these issues.
And I think part of that too was also getting your administration on board and making sure that you kind of had a team working along with you. Is that right?
I was really fortunate that my administrative team was incredibly receptive. It helped having very specific materials to bring to the administration team and to say, this is what the program offers and this is what we can do with it. So.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to jump to Andrea Honigsfeld and just kind of thinking about a holistic approach to engagement and knowing that, it works best when you share and teams are working with one another. Can you talk a little bit about how you can cross-departmental, departmentally to make this happen?
Absolutely. Now, I have some slides. I was wondering if they could be uploaded as I speak, or are we going to share the slides after the session?
I think we're going to, here we go.
Here we go. Wonderful. Great. So often I start by simply reflecting on who are the English learners that we're working with, who are the 21st century immigrants that we are having in our classes, and are they immigrant children, newcomers to this country, or are they children of immigrants? So really understanding the within group diversity is critical. So this will be available, of course, after the session for a closer examination, but considering the very rich complexity of this group is essential when we start talking about collaboration. Another point that I'd like to make is how we define this population. Our federal designation is limited English proficient, LEP, when in some counties the officials refused to use that term and changed it to language enriched pupil. So considering these children as ones who bring a wealth of information, funds of knowledge, multilingual skills to the classroom, and creating a context in which they truly belong. But how can we make sure that within the context of a school they truly belong? I have been working with my colleague Maria Dove on creating a framework for collaborative activities within schools. And as you asked about, creating interdisciplinary or cross-departmental collaborations is essential. Working with this population cannot be solely just the responsibility of bilingual teachers or ESL teachers, ENL teachers. So this is the framework that Maria and I have created to offer a range of choices to teachers in all the departments that serve English learners, both instructional and non-instructional collaborative practices. It's critical that teachers jointly plan and map their curriculum, co-develop instructional materials, and they look at students' work together. So when an ESL teacher or ENL teacher, ELD teacher, there are lots of different names across the country, would sit together with colleagues whose background is language acquisition and literacy development, they bring such combined expertise to the table that they analyze the work ahead of them and they plan much more effective instruction for English learners. And that collaboration doesn't have to stop in the classroom. Of course, out of classroom, non-instructional collaboration would also be critical. And here are a few examples: joint professional development, something that's happening right now. People from different disciplines work together. And of course, we can't stop collaborating in the school context. We have to look beyond. And I borrowed from the Education Alliance's framework for examining what kind of barriers do we have to overcome. And I truly embrace their recommendations for overcoming these barriers, such as establishing a welcoming and family-friendly school community in which parents feel comfortable to enter and to engage with other parents and teachers and administrators. But parents and families also need opportunities for collaboration, that they feel valued within an intercultural or cross-cultural context. So we all have to develop better skills in intercultural communication as educators. And finally, families must have access to multilingual resources so that they learn about the American school norms. So that's what I put together. Any other questions, I will be happy to answer later.
Yeah, please enter questions in the box so that we can continue to address those throughout. Andrea Garcia-Fernandez, kind of based on Dr. Burby and Dr. Honigsfeld's information, can you tell us a little bit? I know you're still young, but about school, and was there that engagement provided, that intercultural understanding opportunities for its students? I know we've talked a little bit about that.
Right. So when I first moved here, I moved to New York. I was part of PS 64 in Queens. And my first 2.5 years were great because my teachers spoke Spanish. They could speak to my parents. I felt safe. I felt comfortable. If there was a word I didn't know in Spanish, in English, I could say it in Spanish and they would teach it to me. But it was very different when I moved to Philadelphia, and I was one of the only Hispanic students there. So I felt engaged to the point that I got there. One of the first things that a teacher said to me when they introduced me, when I said, my name is Andrea, and she said, you're in America now, your name is Andrea, it took away the identity that I had. And, when I think about it today, I think, what a difference would it have made for her to try to say my name the way it was, or to get to understand that my name it's who I am. And for her to remind me that I'm in America and I should change that, I think it was a really big culture shock. So curriculum wise, I don't think they incorporated it, but I was one of 30 students. So I just think there was effort missing in trying to engage and really communicate with them.
And Alaísa, working with, educators at your school, with students, with parents, what are some of the social and psychological factors that you need to take into account when helping everyone kind of navigate this, just working together and learning about one another?
I work in such a diverse school, and again, we have had up to 100 different languages spoken at through the years. So diversity is paramount. It's everywhere when you walk around the halls, and you saw that, Claire, yourself. And I think that the greatest challenge is for teachers and students alike, the entire faculty, not only teachers, to leave their stereotypes behind. Sometimes they have had a negative experience with a family from a certain country, and they carry that baggage and they project that into the new relationship. Many times it's out of not being aware of the student's cultural background. So I am always encouraging my colleagues to do a little search about that specific culture, to learn something, to surprise the student. What Andrea Garcia-Fernandez said, what happened to her teacher, not being aware of her, the importance of her name, which is for everyone. How about learning about that name, to pronounce that name, to say one word, to understand something about the culture? So I believe that it's so important for educators to take one more step to become closer to the students, their families, and establish this relationship. In therapy, that's called establishing a rapport or a therapeutic alliance. And it is really the most important process for communication to start.
And Dr. Burby, beyond the great work you're doing in the Freshman Center in English, what other adaptations, understanding do you see going on in your school, or don't see going on in your school?
Well, I think our school is actually quite good in the fact that it's a very diverse population. I would say majority from Latin American backgrounds, but it's a broad range, and I really like what Andrea said earlier about assimilation, and I think that's a constant struggle in the classroom when you have the idea of everybody talks about America as a melting pot, as something that we have to assimilate into, and everybody has to sort of become this uniform Western Europeanized product, and that seems to be the general assumption. Where so many teachers that I've seen, not so much in my school, but in just in the education field, seem to be focused on having a second language, having another native language other than English as a defect, as some kind of obstacle to be overcome, as opposed to being a bit of cultural enrichment. I tell my students when they, one of the first things I ask them when they come in is, how many of you speak another language? And inevitably, many hands go up, and I just say, well, congratulations, you're bilingual, and that's a marketable skill. So all we have to do is work on developing it, your skills in both languages. So, I'm here to help you develop your skills in English. And so much of English language arts is also about cultural awareness and I don't want to say, that balance between assimilation and cultural preservation. I think we can do more as teachers to work on helping students shore up their own cultural backgrounds as well, and being able to communicate them better to people in other cultures using the common language of English.
That's great. Dr. Honigsfeld, I know that in yesterday and today, a lot of questions were around testing. They were also about, just kind of the lack of professional development. And what are some of the things that you've seen to kind of address these two issues?
Testing is a very hot topic in New York State, especially where we live on Long Island. There's a very strong opt-out movement going on in which parents remove their children from standardized tests. And the other conversation that's happening is around the fairness and equity issues related to standardized testing. The current research shows, and I heavily borrow and rely on Margot Gottlieb's work, who is the foremost expert on assessment for English learners from the WIDA consortium. I will be able to post some links and resources later on related to her work. So she very firmly believes in a complex assessment system in which we create formative and summative assessment tools that accurately measure both English learners' language progression and academic attainment. So standardized tests more often than not do not accurately reflect what an English learner can produce both in the language and in the content area. And could you repeat the second part of your question?
Just mainly about the lack of professional development. I know you work with a lot of educators, and what are some of the ways that you've seen, teachers either teach themselves, teach others if their school system is not providing that for them?
The fundamental problem with professional development is the one-shot deal, that the spray and pray. I just recently learned that approach, that you spray some ideas and then you're praying that it's actually going to stick. That doesn't really work, because what an alternative and very hard to implement alternative is to create sustained and self-sustained professional development opportunities for teachers, such as collegial circles, professional learning communities, study groups, in which committed educators get together within the context of the school day. So you certainly need to create the logistical structural support for that, so that they could study aspects of their teaching and observe students in action, reflect on their practice, videotape lesson segments. So all kinds of very creative but comprehensive steps to professional development is needed. I only know a handful of schools that would make an attempt to go in this direction. It continues to be the typical workshop model. You have an outside expert who comes in, they hold a workshop, and then we leave, and we never know what's going to happen next. So I think in collaboration with the local expertise of teachers and really tap into the local expertise is something that I would recommend.
That's a great recommendation. And also from the attendees, I'd love to see in the chat box anything that your school is doing, or maybe something that you're going to try. And also, right now is the time to ask burning questions that you haven't had addressed about, alternative approaches to engagement? Teachers, whether they're veterans or new, students, native born, foreign born, and all parents, how to truly get a community engaged. And Alaísa, I know that I've seen you in action and, working across different departments. But one thing is also the lack of training for a lot of the teachers. And how does this affect students in the classroom?
Well, it's so hard to speak about it, about my colleagues. Actually, the lack of training, how it affects is due to the teachers. It's hard to say a tough word, but I can find a better one. Otherwise, I'll switch to Portuguese, so you have to bear with me. Ignorance is not knowing that the situation that the students encounter themselves in. Many times the staff, they come to my office to say that a student is not doing something, or the student doesn't care, or the family, never returns my calls. And I think that my job is to become the advocate for the student and use the opportunity to educate the teacher on the situation, the cultural situation that student encounters, himself, and the family situation, economic, the fact that the families work so many hours and that they are not available to return a phone call. And I think that if I use these techniques, if I use this dialogue modeling as a technique for the teacher to use it, himself or herself, I think that they become more interested in going back to the students and communicating in a different way.
That's good. So I saw in the comments really about outside experts and how a lot of districts do bring professional development to the schools. I think that's part of why ILC and the Immigration Council put together this 2-day webinar, because we wanted to really show people who are in the trenches to give, examples of diversity, of, coming at this from different approaches. So what are some of the ways we can be intentional about integration? Andrea Garcia-Fernandez.
So I think for one, it's really being intentional in understanding the culture. As Andrea said, maybe learning how to spell a name. And if you don't know how to say it, asking what it stands for. Make the student understand that although they're in a different place, completely different from what they're used to, it's a safe space and that someone cares about their culture, even though they feel they've been ripped from it. And I think it's really important for immigrant children, for the teachers to build trust with the family. And I know that's hard because of the financial resources. They might have to work 2 or 3 jobs. My parents were never the PTA parents. They barely went to a conference. And when they went to a conference, they didn't understand what they were saying. And I was what you would consider a troublemaker in school. And not because I wanted to. It was out of fear. So also understanding that fear will play a part into why the student acts the way they are. At the end of the day, I came when I was 7. I was a child. And knowing that I was in a country that I wasn't supposed to be in and that I had to not really tell anyone my status, it really affected the way I acted for behavior and also the way I dreamt. What did I want to be when I grow up? That's a question it's really hard to ask an immigrant children, because if I want to be a doctor, I also know that I can't apply to school. And if I apply to school, I also know that I can't pay for it. So having to frame the questions a little bit different, understanding what their background is, it starts with building the relationships with the parents. And listen, if we had Google back in 1994, it would have been great, because they could have typed it into a little box and a sentence would have came out on the other end that would allow the teacher to communicate with my parents, maybe a little bit slower, but still communicate with them. So the resources are there. It's going to take an extra step. It's going to take just a little bit more care. But at the end of the day, these parents brought their children here for an opportunity, for a better life. They're just looking for the access to it. And I think as long as the parents feel that the teacher is trying, they're going to do their best to meet them halfway. But it's really scary. My parents never asked for help. We didn't have money, but we never asked for school lunches. We just lived in a whole box of fear. And that translated to me, I knew when I came at 7 years old, the things that I could ask and could not ask, the questions I could answer and could not answer. And that's a really young age. One other thing that I think would be great as far as for the student themselves to assimilate and the classroom to assimilate to that immigrant student is really understanding the immigrant story in this country as a whole. Maybe a project that makes students who have been born here to understand where their family came from. So for me, what my life looked like at 7 years old is completely different than my son at 6. So understanding also that maybe your generation, you were born here, but if we look 4 generations back, look how far your family has come and how could we create more prosperity in these families by just understanding where they come from and helping them build on that. I think it's really important for the rest of the students, especially with everything that's going on today, with all the prejudice, to understand that they're not here to take the jobs. They're here for a better life. Like your parents came, and maybe your grandparents came, or your great-great-great-grandparents came to look for an opportunity. They're just here today. And, you were here 50 years ago. And then I'm just trying to think. The other thing that I wanted to say, manage the frustration with teachers. I think because my parents didn't want to ask for help, I didn't want to ask for help. So when I saw a teacher getting frustrated with not being able to communicate with me, I shut down. I didn't want to be an extra burden in a place I wasn't supposed to be at. So I think it's very important for the teachers to manage the frustrations. And I think that could be done just by setting the expectations. Like, listen, we're going to have a problem communicating, but it's just a challenge we're going to get through together, and we both are going to be better because of it. I think that's really important for a student, especially at a very young age, to understand it's okay to ask questions. It's okay if you don't know, we'll learn together. And really having that partner in that. And then the fear part, I used to tell teachers that I didn't want to go to college. I used to underperform on purpose because I didn't want anyone to ask me what my plans were after high school. I was undocumented until I was 20 years old. And then I was able to start my career, but until that point, I feared the question, what college are you going to? So maybe understanding some of the local resources, we understand that you might not be the solution. You might not be able to point us, but at least if there's empathy there that we're going to try together and, here's what we could point you to. Let's have these conversations in a safe space. It might really help the immigrant children achieve what they came here for, which is an opportunity.
Well, Andrea Garcia-Fernandez, you truly are like the American dream. I mean, really, I think you really encapsulated a lot of what we've been talking about. And I loved what you said, learning together, because that's really what I see engagement is, learning together. And, we just learned all about the impact of stories, and your story right now, I think really is powerful. And, I haven't looked at the questions in the box because I was just so entrenched in, what you were saying. But I think you also helped to debunk myths and stereotypes. And I'm going to jump to Alaísa, because I know as a mental health, specialist, that a lot of what Andrea Garcia said is, the fear and, just the behavioral. We talked a little bit about that yesterday, is that acculturation. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you can find creative ways to engage teachers, students, and, others in the community to help with that?
Mm-hmm. I love to tell teachers that they ask me, how can I engage the student? I ask them, have you ever been out on a date that you really wanted to connect with this person? So think back, what do you do? So you use verbal and nonverbal communication. You open your mind, you really show your interest in that person, and you continue to make efforts. Well, that's more or less what works for, parents, students, and everybody else. So what Andrea said, I think it was, beautiful example. And that's exactly what students do. Students shut down, your story, Andrea, is just, the story of so many students. And I think it's so important for teachers to become, educators in general, not only teachers, administrators, to become aware of this process, because most people are not aware of what's going on with the children, and they assume. And again, my biggest flag this year, is stereotype. I really believe that we tend to approach each other with this baggage of information about how the person is going to be, how the situation is going to be. We make these assumptions, we judge, and we condemn the person without giving them a chance, without asking them questions. So with students that are shutting down, students that are withdrawing, take your time to talk to them. Again, imagine what you would do on that date and approach the students showing interest. I think that there are a few things that I have a PowerPoint that I would like to post at the end. Two things that I think are very important. One is developing empathy. We have to always walk a mile on somebody else's shoes. How would you feel if you were a foreign student elsewhere? Imagine how would that experience be? And by using your experience as a human being, try to understand what could be happening, but do not assume, ask. Just say, I think I would be feeling this way. Is this going on with you? The second thing is to overcome our own shyness. What Andrea said, fear. I think that a lot of people, a lot of adult educators, they are a bit embarrassed about not knowing about the other's culture. But they don't want to ask. They don't want to, admit that embarrassment. And so try to come out of your shell. One thing that I always learned from my mentor here, Dr. Honigsfeld, is to always have this, this beginner's mind. Always ask and, be curious about it, about what's going on. And trying to leave your prejudice behind. Just leave that, keep that in check. I would like to share, actually, I'm going to post on the chat box one quote from, I hope it stays there. I don't know if I have enough room, from Paulo Freire, one of my idols. I don't think that it can go through because there isn't enough space, I think, but I will read it. Through dialogue, the teacher of the students and the students of the teacher cease to exist, and a new term emerges. Teacher-student with students-teachers. The teacher is no longer the one who teaches, but one who is himself taught in dialogue with the students, who in turn, while being taught, also teach. They become jointly responsible for a process in which all grow. I love this quote because it expresses what our jobs as not only educators, but human beings is about. Just thinking about the quote that was presented in the previous webinar, I think that we should keep that in our heart.
That's great. And I think, you're right, because the teachers become the students. And then on that note, I'm just going to go around and ask you something that you've seen work in, lesson plan, curriculum that can be used in the classroom or community that uses or talks about immigrant students in a positive way that helps people build that empathy and create that connection. Dr. Honigsfeld, anything?
Absolutely. When I walk into a school building, within 10 seconds, you have a feel for the building. So before we even get to the teaching learning process, how do we create an environment in which parents, the community, the students feel immediately welcome? In a number of schools, I have seen huge posters which basically say in every language spoken in the building, I do not speak, or I speak Hungarian, which is my native language, in Hungarian. I need a translator. And there is some sort of a system already established, a dial-in translator, an interpreter, or somebody on hand in the building who can immediately communicate with that parent. So this multilingual presence in the building makes such a big difference. In another building, I've seen, again, in every language that's spoken in the building, signs like welcome, we're happy to see you. I often challenge teachers, try to learn 20 sentences in every language that's spoken in your classrooms and ask students to teach you so that they feel that they are now on the other side of the equation and they are the knowers. And we teachers and educators are the ones who really have to be open-minded, as Alaísa mentioned, and be willing to learn. So I see language as an absolutely critical asset that we have to value and bring into the building, and not be afraid that kids will not learn English. The native language is such an important part of everybody's identity. It's a tool. It's something that we have to nourish and value.
That's great. And we talked about respecting that as well in the home, and that heritage language at home is also an asset. Dr. Burby, something you want to share?
Okay. Well, first of all, I find any attempt to reach the students where they are is really huge. One of the things that I've been learning, I've been working a lot on my own cultural awareness as a teacher over the past several years, and it's taken some time to develop that. But I really liked what Ms. Grudzinski had to say about the Paulo Freire quote, for one thing, about teachers being students and students being teachers. That's crucial, I think, to student development. It's the thing that brings them out of their shells. I have, as I might have mentioned, I'm like in the process of trying to learn Spanish, and I will from time to time. One of the lessons that I frequently use is I ask students about idiomatic expressions in their other languages. A lot of times students struggle with that. They come to they come to the United States and they're not familiar with some of our idioms. And of course, any idiomatic expression is nonsense when it's taken literally. And so I asked them, are there expressions like in your culture, like walk a mile in their shoes, where if you say that's something you're doing literally, it seems kind of stupid, but it has another meaning. And is there anything like that you from your culture that you're familiar with that you could share? And every now and then, I'll pull something out, but there's that bit of cultural awareness. They're reaching students where they happen to be is just, absolutely tremendous. It helps a lot. I become the student. I can give you an example. Like just even this week, I just started teaching summer school, and for the very first time, I have a transgender student who's in the process of transition, and that student is, it's challenging because there's a lot I don't know about it, about the process or about her experience. When she went through my building 2 years ago, she was a boy, and now she's a girl, and her records actually hadn't caught up with that. So it created a possibly embarrassing moment. I know it's not exactly about, maybe slightly off topic, but it also speaks to, giving the student an opportunity to teach me something. I can think of a cultural thing that happens in my classroom that a lot of teachers aren't familiar with, and that is, when students aren't sure how to pronounce your name, and they will call you, well, as a guy, they'll refer to me as Mr. They'll try to get my attention, Mr. You probably experience this. Any of you who have been in front of a class of adolescents have probably experienced this. It took me some time to realize that, while that's it's perceived as a very disrespectful thing in the English language to refer to someone as Mr. It's kind of a dehumanizing thing. But in Spanish, the direct translation is señor, which is a term of respect. So I know I went for years thinking these kids were just kind of being disrespectful when really they were trying to be respectful, and it took them to teach me that was correct.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that story as well. I know that on one of our lessons, I wanted to talk a little bit about identity, is the privilege walk. And I know that Alaísa and Dr. Burby have done that. That will be made available to you as well. And as we wrap things up, I want to see if anyone in the of the participants also have examples that they've seen that have been successful. And then also Andrea Garcia-Fernandez, because you brought up the name and, told us your story, something had to inspire you to kind of make that leap, because now you're a successful associate director. And, what was that inspiration? Did it come from a teacher or elsewhere? What type of engagement was that?
It started with a 10th grade substitute teacher, actually. The teacher for that social studies class in 10th grade had went on maternity leave. And so we had one substitute teacher that was there the entire time. And I was sleeping in class every day. It was a dark classroom after lunch. But I aced Russian history for my midterm. And he pulled me to the side and he told me, I know you're not applying yourself. I don't know why, but I know you didn't copy of anyone because everyone else failed. So you are smarter than you're pretending to be. And I'm not going to let you fail yourself. So he put me in all level 1 classes as opposed to being in level 2 classes that, I coasted through. Still did very well. And then at that time I was working for a daycare for cash, of course, because I couldn't work. And there was a parent there who took lots of interest in me. And he would always ask me how I managed to do so much within the daycare. And I was very smart. And where are you going for college? The most dreaded question I had in my teenage years. And for a long time, I just said, I'm not going. Oh, it's not for me. Until one day I waited till no one was in the room. And I said, listen, Horace, I have to tell you the truth. Please keep it between me and you. I would love to go to college. I can't. Because the first question they ask after name, address, and social security number is, are you a legal citizen or authorized resident in the United States? And there's 2 boxes, yes or no. There's no maybe, it's to no. So once I see those applications, there's no point of me applying. And then on top of that, I can't apply to financial aid. So why try? He looked at me in my eyes and he said, is that the only reason that you're not going to college? I said, yes. The very next day, he brought an application to my office. He happened to work for an organization in Philadelphia that helped inner city youth get to college, just group students from the entire city that want to go to college, took us on college tours. And at that time, it was the beginning of what it's now common, taking college level classes during high school and using them as credits. I ended up graduating with 21 college credits because all he needed was my name and social security number to put me as part of the enrolled class. I didn't have to go through the whole application process. And being that I graduated with 21 college credits, I was now a transfer student. I just continued my education. While I was working towards my associates, I became documented. But had I never had the conversation, had I never opened up and said that, I would never be here.
Wow.
And I think it's really important to people show that they care. I really appreciate everyone who's on this call because it means that you're trying to make a difference in somebody's life. And I got to say that today, I get to do that in a different way. And one of the things that work for us, we still have to assimilate cultures. I work with mostly minorities, and we have to assimilate cultures. And one of the things that works well for us today is doing interactives, getting people understanding that not everyone is like them, understanding that there will be prejudices that come when they walk into a room. People are automatically going to see them a certain way. Owning it, not owning it in the sense that it is them, but owning that that's the perception because they haven't had any other experiences. And then being able to really interact and perform to who they want to be as opposed to who people think they are. I think that's what Horace and my substitute teacher allowed me to see, that it wasn't what I thought the world thought of me. It's I get to decide who I want to be in this world. And if I'm just given the opportunity, I'm able to perform it. But you have to show you care. Otherwise, they're not going to think if you don't care, we're not going to either.
And like I said before, you are the American dream because one of the values that, we hold dear to our hearts is the belief that we are free to be whoever we are, to say whatever we want to say and to go wherever we want to go. And I thank all of you on the panel for bringing, these stories and these tips for engagement in the classroom. And I think, we got that mentorship and teachers, educators, administrators, you are on the vanguard of bringing this information about the benefits of diverse communities, diverse learners. And, we will continue this conversation. This is just the beginning. And I'm going to turn it over back to Denzel. Thank you so much, everybody.